Hey guys, welcome back to Heart Breathings. Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite parts of writing to really think about and plan in my novels, which is pacing. So if you're interested in some of my writing tips about how to pace your novel in order to make it better and to keep readers turning pages into the night, then just stick around. So this is one of my favorite writing topics and something that I didn't really get a handle on until several novels in, but now it's one of my favorite things to not only play with in my writing, but also to kind of plan in advance and to really make sure that my story hooks readers in from the start and then keeps them turning pages. That's always my goal. And even though I know I always have a lot to learn, I think that this is something I'm getting better and better at with practice. So let's talk about pacing. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Sarra Cannon. I am the author of more than 25 young adult and new adult novels. And I have a little baby at home and she's upstairs in her jumper. So you might hear a little bit of noises coming from, the various little electronic toys, so just ignore. So what is pacing? Pacing in your novel or short story or any written story is all about how fast or slow your story unfolds. So pacing can be manipulated and controlled both on a structural level for the entire story or the entire novel. We're mostly just going to talk about novels in general today, although you can bring this down into novellas and short stories as well. It applies to all of them. You can think about pacing in terms of the overall structure of your entire novel, but you can also think about pacing within each act of your novel, within every chapter or every scene, and then even within every sentence and how you're using different types of, different lengths of sentences, different types of words. Every single word choice matters when it comes to pacing. So we're going to kind of pick this apart a little bit and I'm going to give you some examples. So before we get into the examples and the nitty-gritty, let's talk about why pacing is important. So first of all, pacing is super important because if you go too slow with your story, if your story is unfolding too slowly, it can start to get really boring and you're going to end up with readers that just kind of give up because you're not getting to the action or the point of the story. So this obviously can be genre specific and I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But if you go too fast with how your story unfolds and you don't give the reader basically any time to breathe between action and fight scenes, then sometimes what can happen is they fall asleep on the edge of their seats. And now I can't even remember who it was that said that, but I know that came from a writing book that I read many years ago. It was either Donald Moss or James Scott Bell or maybe James Fry, and I can't remember now, so I'm going to look that up and try to put it in the description box below. But I remember reading a book about how to structure your novel, and he was talking about how when you go too fast and you never let up, like action from the very first scene to the end of the book, readers can fall asleep on the edge of their seats, meaning that it's go, 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 and you're not putting any emotional beats in or any reaction scenes in, and it becomes boring because there's too much action. So let's talk about how pacing is sort of influenced by what genre you're writing. Obviously, if you're writing a long, sweeping historical or a long, sweeping epic type novel, readers are going to expect with this very long 300,000 word epic or whatever it is, that you're going to take more time for your description, for things to unfold. There's going to be more internal monologue or more sweeping description of the landscape and things like that, because what you're doing in a long sweeping epic, whether it's epic fantasy or an epic historical or whatever it is, you're setting a scene and readers are there for the experience of seeing everything that you're seeing or experiencing who these characters are. And there's often multiple POVs and other things that come into play, but they're expecting a story that unfolds mostly very slowly in certain parts. Now, we'll talk about some things that are sort of consistent about every genre in just a second, but going back to that genre thing, so epic novels, long sweeping historicals, things like that, readers expect them to unfold slower than other novels. When you hit a thriller, for example, just the title there will tell you that most readers are going to expect a thriller to explode onto the page right at the first scene and then continue to go very quickly. So action type novels, thrillers, sometimes even comedies can be very fast paced. So a lot of urban fantasy will also be very fast paced. Romance, readers have come to expect usually a certain kind of pacing that is a mix between fast and slow. So It depends on what genre you're writing. Sometimes, for example, in horror, authors are going to play around with pacing so that they can build the anticipation for when that moment strikes that is going to scare you. And that's how they create fear in those novels, is by playing with the pacing and elongating how some things unfold and explaining every tiny little detail about how the character's reacting and what they're hearing and what they're seeing, because that is going to immerse you into it. And then going faster just as your character's heart begins to race. So you can often play around with pacing depending on the type of genre. And I highly recommend to you that if you are just getting a handle on what pacing is and you want to make it better in your own novel, that what you need to do is find some comparable novels in the genre that you're writing and read them with a specific eye on pacing. How fast or slow does the story unfold? Where does it begin to move faster? And where does the author take their time to really elongate certain things? So for example, let's talk about romance. What readers will often expect with romance is maybe you have a slightly slower pace as the couple is getting to know each other. They meet, they start to form a relationship, they go out. There might be some things where you're describing what the heroine's doing and then you describe separately what the hero's doing and they're not together. And those things move a little bit slower because we're just getting to know those characters. But put them in a moment at the end of that first date where they're about to have their very first kiss, and suddenly, just the same way that your reader's heart might start to race, or your heroine's heart might start to race, wondering if he's going to kiss her, the pacing also is going to pick up, and you want readers to be turning those pages very quickly to see if they do get that first kiss or not. Is this couple going to fall in love, and how is it going to happen? And that can speed up the pace. So when you get to moments in your own novel where you want the pace to speed up or slow down, you need to pay attention to word choice and sentence structure and white space on the page. So we're going to get down to that in just a moment, but there's a couple things I want to cover first. So before we get into those word choices and sentence structure, let's talk about the grand scheme of the novel and your overall story structure and how that relates to pacing. So when you think about pacing in your novel, you need to be thinking about the actual structure of your novel. So what I'm talking about here, of course, is 3-act structure. Most stories are put together in a certain way. So you've got the opening or the hook of the story, and then somewhere around 25% into the novel, you're going to have the first climax. This is also known as the doorway of no return, or it can be known as, the first plot point. It depends on kind of what book you're reading or what structure you're following. But almost always there's a moment at the end of the first act, which comes usually around 25% of your novel, where you are going to have a climactic event that changes your character's life forever. It could be that first kiss in a romance. In an urban fantasy, it could be a moment where your character discovers that vampires actually exist and it changes their life because they're going through a doorway into a new world. So depending on your genre, the first act climax will look very different, but across all genres, this is a very common thing to see, is that climactic moment. So when that climax happens, you can usually expect for the pace of your story to speed up, because this is a big moment. This is something big happening in your character's life, and you really want to hook readers onto that page and keep them turning. It's usually also action oriented. It could be that they learn something new, but it's going to feel very active for your character and for your reader. The next big moment where things are going to speed up really big is at 50% of your novel, where they hit what's known as the midpoint. So this midpoint moment is often where the entire story turns over on its head, where you have what Alexandra Sokoloff in her book Screenwriting Tricks for Authors calls the now it's personal loss. But this is the moment where your character is really engaged in this story and there's no turning back again. So it's a second doorway of no return, where your character's locked into the story and some kind of big thing happens. And again, when I say big, I mean big for your genre. In some types of genres, like certain types of romance or those sweeping historicals, maybe the big thing is just a revelation or some kind of relationship. In a thriller, it's going to be some kind of explosion or some kind of big deal. In stories that are urban fantasy or fantasy world in some way, it's often going to be some kind of conflict or or fight between the characters. So you just need to know your genre well enough to know what kind of moments happen at the midpoint. But regardless of genre, it's usually a place where pacing tends to go very fast. The next moment where we see this is often around 75%, which is this kind of final doorway or whatever the final clues are that start to lead into the climax of the story, or what's known as the dark night of the soul or the all is lost moment. So this could be the moment where your characters are starting to, they've got their plan, they've discovered their plan, they've figured out all the things, and now they're going to go in and put themselves into danger, or whatever that final climax moment is. In a romance, it's something like the declaration, where your character finally realizes where they've messed up, that they're going to go for it. It's like, if you think about When Harry Met Sally, to pull an old movie out that some of you might not have seen, when he realizes that he wants to spend the rest of his life with her, and he goes running on New Year's Eve, and he's running in the streets of New York and can't find a cab. That's what we're talking about the climax of the story. So everywhere from 75% until you hit that climax moment where the resolution begins or the final battle, that should all be fast-paced in your story according to the rules of your personal genre, of what you're writing. So structurally, you can plan this out, basically. You can structure your novel when you're plotting it, or if you're a pantser and you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, when you're going back to do edits, you need to pay attention to where those climax tend to occur. Now, in a movie, you can almost time this by your watch. So if a movie is 120 minutes long or 2 hours long, 30 minutes in, you're going to see that first act climax. You're going to see another big climax at 1 hour. And then from an hour and a half all the way to the end of 2 hours, you're going to see nonstop action usually, or nonstop conflict and resolution. So that's basically what you can do in a movie. Novels can be a little bit different because as writers, we have a little bit more leeway than they do when someone's visually watching something. But some of the same rules apply. If that first act drags out for so long, and you don't give your readers that climax moment around 25% in, let's say that you are writing a 100,000 word novel, that climax should be happening. Some kind of action, some kind of thing that turned your character's world upside down should be happening around 25,000 words into your book. If it happens too soon, like happens at 15,000 words, then what might happen is you have too long of a stretch between that first climax and then maybe not having another fast-paced moment or another climax until like 50,000 words in. That could slow down your second act because you want that consistent fast pacing that's going to keep readers turning pages and keep them interested in your story. So basically what I'm saying here is that the pacing of your novel is usually faster at the beginning because you may start out slow and setting the atmosphere and setting the tone, but usually in the beginning of your novel, you're going to have something that hooks readers in, and that is often known as the hook. So it'll be something that's a little bit more fast paced that gets your reader's attention. And then at around 25% in with that act one climax, it's going to be a little faster again. Then you're going to see another really fast-paced moment at the midpoint or around 50%, and then again from about 75% until the end of the climax of your novel. So those are some moments structurally where you're traditionally going to see more fast-paced things happening. Now, of course, depending on your genre, it may be fast-paced most of the time with little moments of like reaction or emotion, and all of that is going to depend on your genre. That's why it's so important to understand what genre you're writing and to read widely within that genre. So one of the questions you might be asking is, how do I speed up the pacing in those moments within the novel? Well, there are a lot of tools that you can use in order to speed up your pacing. One, like I talked about at the beginning of this video, is sentence structure or word choice. So a lot of times when you're trying to slow down the pacing, you're going to have more of sweeping, long paragraphs, big chunks of description, very little white space on the page because the reader is having to read this longer bit of text. And a lot of times it's including things that are not action oriented. They're things like descriptions or characters' inner monologue and things like that. So on the opposite or flip side of that, when you want to speed up your pacing, you're going to want a lot of white space on the page. You're going to want maybe even chopped sentences that aren't complete sentences. You might choose snappier word choices that just sound like faster or choppy, so to speak. Instead of using really long sentences, you're going to shorten those sentences up. Instead of having dialogue that has a lot of dialogue tag and internal emotion and description, when you're trying to speed up your pacing, you might have very short dialogue tags like he said, or he jumped over this, or whatever. So you're going to just start truncating those sentences to a degree, and every single word choice you make can either speed up or slow down your pacing in this way. So I'm going to just read a couple examples for you from a short story that I just finished, and these might not be perfect examples, but it'll give you a little bit of an idea. So as part of the atmospheric opening of this story, I do a little bit of description, and on my page I don't have a lot of returns, so it's a lot of like 5 or 6 sentences per paragraph, or at least 3 to 4 sentences per paragraph, which slows the pacing a bit. So this is the opening of the story, and you can hear the slowness of the pacing here. I barely have a minute to appreciate the satisfying spookiness of the old Victorian house at the top of the hill, the warm glow of its lights shrouded in fog on this cool, rainy night. I stand there anyway, of course, because I'm me and I can't resist a good haunted house. It's a glorious sight, to be honest. The full moon is nothing more than an eerie glow through the mist, adding to the mystery of the house, where a man went insane 100 years ago and killed half the guests who had come to a special ball to celebrate his wife's birthday. To this day, no one really knows what happened, but there are many people who think the souls of the 15 individuals who died that night still haunt the grounds of the estate. So as you can see, like some of these sentences are like 2 full lines long. They have a lot of extra phrases and conjunctions and different things like that that are going to make them longer, more sweeping sentences. There's also a lot of description there. You're giving a backstory of what happened at this house. You're setting the scene of what this Victorian house looks like on a rainy, foggy night. But later, when I'm really wanting to pick up the pace just a little bit, if you can see this, well, I know you can't see my page, so I'll see if I can pop in a little bit of a screen grab here. But now I'm hitting the return key. Every single line starts something new. At most, every paragraph has maybe 2 sentences to it or 2 lines, and then there's another return, which creates more white space and also gets readers zipping through it faster and faster. When they have long, big paragraphs that don't have breaks in them, readers tend to read it more slowly because they're having to focus on every single line, making sure they're tracking it correctly. So when you have that white space and you're hitting return and there's something happening in each line, things naturally begin to move faster, or your pacing begins to speed up. So here's what's happening in this scenario, and you can maybe hear the difference in word choices, the difference in how long the sentences are, and everything else. Maybe we'll see a few ghosts tonight after all. Look. I turn around, my heart racing. There's movement in the distance, but it's so dark and foggy that it's hard to make out what it is. I quickly grab for my thermal camera and hit record. Here, hold this, and take a few pictures if you can, I say. Let me know if you see anything interesting. I hand the camera to Seth, and as his fingers brush mine, chills run through my body. The energy out here is insane. I can hardly believe this is happening. Someone is here. I can feel it, I say. I grab the EVP recorder and slip my headphones on. Hello, I say clearly. I'm Ella. I just want to talk. Is anyone there? I pause and listen, but no one answers. Hello, is anyone there? So in that little bit of just a little chunk of this story, you can see where I have, purposely sped up the pacing and then taken one small moment, if you noticed it as I was reading, to slow the pacing down for dramatic effect. So as they're doing the action and moving things around and trying to capture this ghost on the EVP and the thermal camera, things are moving very quickly. But then I specifically slow it down here in this section. I hand the camera to Seth, and as his fingers brush mine, chills run through my body. That couple of sentences there is a slower bit of pacing within the action to highlight the reaction that she has when their fingers touch. So it's a little bit of romance there mixed in with the action. So hopefully you can see how, I hit record, I slip my headphones on, I grab this. So word choice matters in speeding up the pacing. Another thing you can do to speed up the pacing, and I think I put an example here, oh, it's in this one, is what I call, or what I've heard called, the cymbal crash at the end of a chapter. So when you get to the end of a chapter, what do you want readers to do? You want them to turn the page and keep reading late into the night. So even if you've had kind of a slow-paced chapter, you really want that last moment of each chapter or each scene to have a bit of a cymbal crash or a zinger or something that makes them think, oh, I gotta know what happens next. And if you want a fast-paced novel that doesn't feel like it's going all the time, but grips your readers, a lot of times you want to play around with those last few sentences or few moments of your chapter so that you keep them, you hook them in every single time, or you have that cymbal crash that goes, oh, now I have to know what happens next. So just a small example of this in my short story. She says, "You're a genius. Like a fool, I want to wrap my arms around him, but I hold back so as not to look like a total crazy person. Come on," I say, unable to hide my excitement. "Let's go find some ghosts." So maybe not the biggest cymbal crash, but I'm just pulling from a short story, but it's that moment of, ooh, are they going to find some ghosts? I want to know if they find some ghosts. They've got everything. They've got a plan. Let's see what happens next. And if you can end almost every chapter of your novel in a moment that's like, oh my gosh, what happens next? You're going to have readers turning pages. And ultimately, if readers are turning pages and they can't put your story down, they're going to want to buy every story you write from then on. So I wrote down a few different things that can make a difference in your pacing. So action, of course, the more things are actually happening, physically happening, or rapid fire dialogue is another one. These kinds of things can speed up your pacing because readers are going to zip through it because they want to know what happens next. What did they say next? What's happening with this argument? So conflict, action, rapid fire dialogue. Those are surefire things that are going to make your pacing go faster. Unresolved questions. This often plays to the cymbal crash at the end of a scene. So unresolved question is that dun 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 moment, or a new discovery, dun dun dun. Like, you know, this is what, oh my gosh, something just got revealed. Let's figure out what happens next. Or a new question or something new comes to light. That usually speeds up the pacing quite a bit. Another thing that can speed up pacing when you're writing multiple POVs, and this is something I absolutely love to play around with, is jumping between characters. So if you have character A just is about to do something really exciting and you leave it unresolved, and then the next chapter they turn to has a different character, you've kind of left character A on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and you want to pull them into what's happening with character B so that they begin to care about what's happening to character B. And then just when you bring that second character up to some kind of climax or discovery, you switch yet again, either to character C or back to character A. And if you can do this, you can often keep people really interested in your story and keep the pacing up really fast. Now, the danger there, which we can talk about when I do a video on how to write multiple POV, is of course that if they love what's happening to character A and you keep switching to character B, but character B is like somebody they don't like or they're not interested in that person's story, you might lose them because they get tired that you're switching between characters at these pivotal moments. But if you do it right and you write all of your characters as interesting characters with stuff going on and a lot of conflict, you're going to keep them hooked. Shorter chapters can do this, or shorter scenes. So if you have a lot of long chapters where there's a lot of things happening, it's very slow paced, but then you get into the meat of that first act climax and you want to speed up your pacing, make the chapter itself shorter. You can also, like I demonstrated, make the sentences shorter. Use snappier words that tend to flow over the brain or the tongue faster. So all of these are devices that you can use to speed up your pacing. Another thing, like I mentioned, is using white space. So hitting return more often instead of having big chunks of dialogue or description. And another one that I think is worth mentioning is using the active voice. So I know there's a lot of stuff out there about using passive versus active, but when you're trying to speed up your pacing, you want to use the active voice as much as possible. So on the flip side, when you're trying to slow your pacing down because you want to highlight an emotion or highlight a scene between two characters and kind of slow it down a little bit, you're going to want to use more description, more emotion, sometimes more passive. It doesn't have to be more passive, but you can use things that are more passive in these moments. Also, more internal dialogue, more of your character's thoughts and what's going on inside them and what their reaction is to things. So since we're talking about reaction, let's go on to one of the final bits of this video, which is talking about what Jack Bickham calls scene and sequel. You also might have heard as action and reaction, but these are pivotal moments in fiction that keep your characters feeling real, but also helps to control the ebb and flow of your story. So for example, if you have a scene of action, something that happens, and you don't give your characters a moment to respond to it and react to it, both physically and emotionally, your story might fall flat, even though you have a lot of fun action in your story. So what you want to do is you want to have action or scene, and then after every major scene, you want to have a moment that Jack Bickham in his book Scene and Sequel, which I'll link down below, calls a sequel scene, or what you might hear in other writing courses called a reaction. Often there will be some kind of physical reaction, and then there will be an emotional reaction. Depending again on what type of genre you're writing, this could just be a single sentence or just a paragraph of reaction, or it could be an entire couple of chapters of reaction. So let's say, for example, your character picks up the phone and he just gets this worse news that, hey, we had the killer, but now he's gone, and worse than that, he's killed again. So you have that moment of action, or that moment of, maybe a chase, and now they're calling the detective. Well, the detective needs to have some kind of reaction to that. So it might start off with a physical reaction. Slams the phone down and throws his bourbon across the room. But then he's going to need to have an emotional reaction. You'll hear in the fiction that he's like, now his jaw is tense and his stomach is rolling from, wishing he hadn't had that last drink. And, all of his muscles have grown tense, and he's, got so much racing in his mind, and he's angry, and you see that in his, in the writing about this character. So he's got that physical immediate reaction. Then he has some kind of emotional reaction. Then sometimes you're also going to see, as part of the reaction sequence, you're going to see a plan. So some kind of rebound of, okay, I've now controlled my emotion and I'm coming up with what I'm going to do next. So in that detective scenario, you have the moment of action where he finds out that they didn't get the guy and that he's killed again. He has a physical reaction by throwing his drink. He has the emotional reaction by showing his anger and feeling it deep in his body. But then he takes a deep breath and he thinks, okay, now what are we going to do? So he makes a decision that he's going to go down to the scene of the crime and he's going to investigate this newest murder. So now he has a plan. And this is often how you will see scene and sequel, or action and reaction, play out in a story. And that is vital to the pacing of your story, as well as being on par with whatever your genre is. So in a romance, if the characters have their first kiss and then they part for the night, you've got that action moment of the first kiss, but then you're going to want to see the reaction. So some of it might be physical, like the girl goes skipping down the street, or the guy calls up his friend and is very excited, or he's like throws his arm up into the air, however cheesy you want it to be. But then there's going to also be an emotional reaction. And sometimes it could be excitement, could be butterflies in the stomach, or it could be fear of, oh my gosh, what have I just gotten myself into? I just kissed the son of my enemy, whatever it happens to be. I know these are cheesy examples, but you're usually going to have some kind of action and then some kind of physical and emotional reaction. And in romance, you'll often see the emotional reaction from both sides of the partnership, be it male, male, female, male, whatever your romance is about. Basically, this idea of action and reaction balances your story out and balances your pacing. So let's just bring this all together with just a few final statements. So to sum it up, pacing is how fast or slow your story unfolds, or the speed at which your story unfolds. At certain points in your story, like the beginning hook, the 25%, 50%, 75%, or all of those act climaxes, you should see an increase in pacing all the way through to the end of the final climax. There are certain ways that we discovered that you can use pacing to keep readers turning through those stories, like rapid fire dialogue, more white space, more active voice, and shorter sentences. Then you also want to think in terms of pacing your scene so that you have action and then your characters have some kind of emotional and physical reaction to that. So you've got the large grand scale structure, and then it comes down to scenes, sequels, and then individual sentences as well. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this writing tip. If you want to see more in detailed writing tips tips from me about other topics for expanding your knowledge and hopefully becoming even better as a writer, please pop those down in the comments down below and let me know what types of topics you would like to explore in the future. All right, guys, if you have not subscribed to this channel, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to get notified whenever new videos come up from me. I am so excited that you're here and hopefully you will stay a part of our Hearties community. Also, I just wanted to say a huge thank you and shout out to storyad.com that put me on one of their top 12 YouTubers in self-publishing to follow this year. So I can't believe that I made it on this list with amazing people like Mark Dawson and Jenna Moracy and just so many other people. So thank you so much to StoryAd. I will link that article down below so that you can also discover other amazing YouTubers like Bethany Adazada, which I'm not sure I'm saying her name right, but I love her. But there are lots of other great YouTubers there that you can follow and hopefully get more great writing advice. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.